The Vanishing Pastor, 1977. In 1977, a black preacher from a small Arkansas town disappeared, gone without a clue. For 25 years, people whispered, wondered, but no one knew the truth. Then in 2002, a logger clearing deep woods found something buried under a rotting tree stump. Something no one was supposed to see. Marcus Freeman, present day. Marcus Freeman, 42, sat in his quiet Ozark apartment, flipping TV channels. A preacher's voice filled the room. Hymns, sermons, stained glass. It hurts to listen. His father, Reverend Elijah Freeman, had a voice like that once, before he vanished. Before the faith, the hope, the answers all dried up. Marcus turned it off. Then, the phone rang. A detective's voice. "Mr. Freeman, we found something." The call, Detective Miller. A logger just dug up an old Adidas bag. Inside, a preacher's robe, a Bible, your father's name. Marcus's chest locked up. 25 years, nobody, no leads. Now, this? Where? He demanded. "Deep woods. We'll send a car." The dig site police tape, flashlights, a rotted out stump. The logger, Tom Jenkins, wiped sweat off his brow. "We were clearing brush, saw the stump, looked off, dug under it, found the bag. Someone buried it here on purpose." Marcus stared at the vintage Adidas bag, dusty, decayed, his father's Bible inside, his robe, his name. Detective Miller stepped closer. "Recognize anything?" Marcus's hands shook. "Yeah, this was his." Then he saw something else, something stuffed in the Bible's pages, something the killer never meant to leave behind. The discovery in the tent. They stepped into a small tent set up nearby. Marcus followed, watching as the bag was laid on a folding table. The officers pulled on gloves and opened it. The Bible came out first, damp and stuck together, but the bag had protected it enough that some words were still readable. Then Marcus saw it. On the first page in the corner, his father's name, written in that same handwriting he knew so well. "That's my father's writing," he said quietly. An officer turned to the last page, where a note was tucked inside. It looked like a prayer, but not an ordinary one. The words begged God to end suffering, questioned why evil existed, and asked for strength against people trying to pull me away from God. Marcus's throat clenched. That's his writing, no doubt. I'd know it anywhere. Next, the robe. Detective Miller handled it carefully. "This has been buried since 1977, she said. "We'll need to send it out for DNA testing. Our small-town lab can't handle this." Marcus touched the fabric. "It's his size. I think it was his." Then a dark thought hit him. "Do you think someone killed him?" The detective studied the robe. No blood, no obvious signs of violence. The old case files never pointed to murder. She gave him a sympathetic look. Maybe he was struggling. Maybe he left this life behind on his own. Marcus shook his head. My father wasn't a coward. If he wanted to disappear, why dig so deep in these woods just to bury a bag? He stared at the Adidas bag. And he'd never owned something like this. He was a simple man. Tom Jenkins nodded. Burying this wouldn't be easy. Look at those roots. Even decayed, it'd take one man hours, maybe days to do this alone. Detective Miller frowned. Were there people who didn't like your father? In the church? The town? Marcus sighed. This was the Ozarks in the 70s, a small religious town with racial tensions. But my father was a good pastor. He didn't make enemies. The detective nodded. We'll review everything. For now, we'll keep digging. As they packed the evidence, Marcus asked for photos. An officer promised copies once the investigation progressed. Then they let him go. Back home, Marcus didn't go inside. Instead, he went straight to his father's study, a room he'd recreated in his apartment with the old man's books and papers. He scanned the shelves, searching for his father's sermons, for answers. Marcus carefully gathered the old notebooks. His father had kept them neatly arranged on the shelf, and though dust had settled over the years, the pages, though yellowed, were still intact. He remembered being just 15 when he first studied these sermons under his father's guidance. Now at 42, only fragments of those lessons remained in his mind. He needed to read them again, not just to remember his father's teachings, but to prove to himself that his father had never wavered in his faith, that he hadn't struggled with his calling, that he hadn't taken his own life. There had to be another explanation. But as Marcus collected the notebooks, he noticed something unsettling. The volume from 1977, the year his father vanished, was missing. He searched everywhere. The study, the bedroom, the cabinets, nothing. All he found were old diaries, each one ending before 1977. Sitting heavily on his father's bed, Marcus frowned. If his father kept records of everything, why were the last sermon notes and diary gone? Maybe they were still at the church. His hands trembled as he packed one of the older notebooks into his bag. It had been 25 years since he'd last stepped foot in Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church, since the day his father disappeared. The drive was short. 10 minutes later, he stood outside the aging building. It looked smaller now, worn by time. As a teenager, he'd seen it as grand, holy. Now it just felt heavy with memories. Taking a deep breath, he pushed open the door. Inside, little had changed. The wooden pews still gleamed. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the floor in colors. The pulpit stood tall, just as it had when his father preached. An elderly man turned toward him, smiling. "May I help you, son?" Marcus swallowed. "I hope so. I'm looking for someone who knows my father." The man introduced himself as Pastor Harold Whitmore, a name Marcus knew well. He had been his father's closest colleague. "I'm Marcus Freeman," he said, "Elijah Freeman's son." Pastor Harold's eyes widened. "Marcus? My goodness, it's really you." His voice softened. "We haven't seen you since my father disappeared," Marcus finished. The pastor nodded sadly. "How have you been?" "I lost my faith after what happened," Marcus admitted. "Even now I struggle." Before Pastor Harold could respond, another man entered, Reverend George Langston. Both men seemed shocked but happy to see him. "What brings you back after all this time?" Reverend George asked. Marcus told them about the body found in the woods, how the police believed his father might have taken his own life. "I need to know the truth," he said. "Did my father ever seem lost? Would he have abandoned his calling?" The two pastors exchanged a glance. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Pastor Harold spoke. "Your father was a devoted man, strong in his faith, but," he hesitated, "no one truly knows what battles a man fights in his heart." Robbie wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "My mom, she's gone. She's right there." He pointed to a fresh grave a few feet away. The headstone read, "Emily Hark, beloved mother, 1985 to 2024. Marcus knelt beside him. "I'm so sorry, Robbie. That must be really hard." The boy nodded, fresh tears welling up. "I miss her so much. Dad says she's in heaven, but I just want her back." Marcus hesitated, then sat down next to him under the tree. "I lost my mom too, a long time ago. I was about your age." Robbie looked up at him, curiosity cutting through his grief. "Really?" "Yeah. And my dad? Well, he disappeared not long after. I never knew what happened to him." Robbie sniffed. "That's worse." Marcus gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe. But you know what? Talking about her helps, even if it's just to her grave." Robbie was quiet for a moment. Then in a small voice he asked, "Do you think she can hear me?" Marcus glanced at his mother's headstone in the distance, then back at Robbie. "I don't know for sure, but I like to think so." The boy wiped his nose and nodded. "Me too." They sat in silence for a while, the breeze rustling the leaves above them. Then Robbie spoke again. "My dad's over there, talking to the pastor. He's sad too, but he doesn't cry where I can see." Marcus followed Robbie's gaze and spotted a man in a dark suit speaking with an older gentleman, Pastor Harold. His breath caught. "What's he doing here?" Robbie stood up, brushing grass off his pants. "I should go back. Dad gets worried if I wander off." Marcus stood as well. "Of course. Take care of yourself, Robbie." The boy gave him a small wave before running toward his father. Marcus watched as the man, presumably Mr. Hark, placed a hand on Robbie's shoulder, then glanced in Marcus's direction. Their eyes met briefly before the man turned back to Pastor Harold. Marcus hesitated. He hadn't expected to see Harold here. Was it a coincidence? Or had the pastor come to visit another grave? Curious, he walked toward them, keeping a respectful distance. As he got closer, he overheard Harold saying, "Such a tragedy. Emily was a devoted woman. The church will always be here for you and Robbie." Mr. Hark nodded stiffly. "Thank you, Pastor. She always loved this place. Said it was peaceful." Harold's gaze flickered to Marcus, and his expression shifted, just for a second, before he smiled politely. "Marcus, I didn't expect to see you here." Marcus nodded. "I was visiting my mother's grave." He glanced at Mr. Hark. "I'm sorry for your loss." The man gave a tight nod. "Thank you." An awkward silence settled over them. Then Harold cleared his throat. "Marcus, I was just telling Mr. Hark about our upcoming memorial service. Perhaps you'd like to attend? It's for all the loved ones we've lost." Marcus hesitated. "I'll think about it." Robbie tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, can we go home now?" Mr. Hark exhaled. "Yes, son. Let's go." He shook Harold's hand. "Thank you again, Pastor." As the Harks walked away, Harold turned to Marcus. "You left something behind at the church." Marcus blinked. "What?" "Your father's notebook. George found it on the library table after you left." Marcus's stomach dropped. How could I have forgotten it? "Is it still there?" Harold nodded. "Locked in my office. I was going to call you, but, well, here you are." Marcus rubbed his temple. "I'll come by tomorrow to pick it up." Harold studied him for a moment. "You seem troubled, more than just about the notebook." Marcus hesitated, then gestured toward the Harks, now distant figures near the cemetery gates. "That boy, he's grieving just like I did. It's strange seeing it from the outside." Harold sighed. "Death is never easy, especially for a child." Marcus looked at him. "Did my father ever counsel people who lost loved ones? People like Mr. Hark?" Harold's expression grew thoughtful. "He did. Your father had a gift for comforting those in mourning." He paused. "In fact, now that I think about it, the months before he disappeared, he was spending a lot of time with a grieving family, a recent widow." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Do you remember who?" Harold frowned, searching his memory. "It was so long ago. I think her name was Clara. Clara something. She had a son, a little boy." Marcus's mind raced. A widow and a child, just like the Harks. "Pastor," he said slowly, "did my father keep records of the people he counseled?" Harold nodded. "He did, in those notebooks of his." Marcus's heart pounded. The missing 1977 journal. "Thank you," he said abruptly. "I need to go." Harold looked surprised but didn't stop him. "Take care, Marcus." As Marcus hurried back to his car, his thoughts were a whirlwind. Was my father's disappearance connected to someone he was helping? And why does this feel like it's happening all over again? He glanced back at the cemetery gates, where Robbie and his father had vanished from sight. "I need that notebook." "Is someone with you? A guardian?" Robbie stayed silent. Marcus frowned, worried. "I can drive you home if you need." "Please, not home," the boy whispered, voice shaking. "They don't like me there. My aunt and uncle." The words hit Marcus hard. After his mom died and his dad vanished, he lived with an aunt and uncle who treated him like a burden. "I get it," Marcus said gently. "I'll stay with you a while, but you'll have to go home eventually. They'll be looking for you." He touched Robbie's shoulder to comfort him and jerked back. The boy's skin burned through his jacket. "Robbie, you're on fire!" Marcus's pulse spiked. "You need a doctor or to go home. I can't leave you like this." "Not home," Robbie begged. "Can I stay with you?" Marcus shook his head. "That'd get me in trouble." "What about the hospital? You need help." Robbie's face twisted with fear. "A church? Please?" "The hospital's better," Marcus insisted. "They can treat your fever." "When my mom was alive," Robbie said softly, "she'd get Holy Communion from the pastor when I was sick. She'd pray over it, and I'd heal." Marcus froze. His father had done that, prepared take-home communion for the sick. He'd helped him as a kid. "I know about that," Marcus said. "My dad was a pastor here." A decision clicked. "Tell you what, go to the hospital with me and I'll bring you communion there. We'll take it together." "Deal?" Robbie hesitated, then nodded. As they walked to the car, Marcus's stomach dropped. The notebook. He'd left it at the church. Later, at the hospital, Marcus convinced the staff to admit Robbie, though he didn't know his address. Before they took him away, Robbie locked eyes with him. "You promised, the communion." "I'll be back," Marcus swore. Back at the church, dusk had fallen. No one answered his call, so Marcus drove over. Inside, a young staffer greeted him. No sign of Pastor Harold. "They're at the cemetery," the guy said, "doing blessings." Marcus stiffened. Since when? He asked about his book and the communion. The staffer helped him find the notebook in the library. But as Marcus turned to leave, he spotted a book about to topple off a high shelf. "Hold on," he muttered, reaching up. "That could hurt someone." Marcus slowed his car and parked behind a cluster of trees, far enough to remain unseen but close enough to observe Reverend George's movements. The detective's voice crackled through the phone. "Stay put. Backup is en route." Marcus watched as Reverend George stepped out of his car, carrying the shovel and the bag. The Reverend walked to the edge of the lookout, where a steep drop led down into the dense forest below. For a moment he simply stood there, staring into the darkness. Then abruptly he swung the shovel and hurled the bag over the edge. Marcus's pulse spiked. "He just threw something into the ravine." Detective Miller's tone sharpened. "Do not move. Do not approach." But Reverend George wasn't done. He turned back to his car, opened the trunk, and pulled out another item, something wrapped in a tarp. Marcus's breath caught. The shape was all wrong for soil or animal remains. Too large. Too human. "Miller, he's got a body." The Reverend dragged the tarp toward the cliff's edge. Marcus's hands clenched around the wheel. Every instinct screamed at him to act. "He's about to dump it. I can't just... Freeman, wait!" But Marcus was already throwing open his door. "Reverend!" His voice cut through the night. George Langston froze, half-turned in shock. The tarp slipped, revealing a pale, lifeless hand. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then the Reverend's face twisted into something unrecognizable. Fear, fury, desperation. He lunged for the shovel. Marcus sprinted forward. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. The cliffside confrontation. Marcus parked a football field away, hidden by a curve in the road. From the shadows, he watched Reverend George step out of his car, headlamp on, shovel in hand, plastic bag in tow. The man moved toward the guardrail, then vanished down a set of rickety stairs leading to the cliff's edge. Marcus gripped his phone. He's heading down to the lower trail, with a bag and a shovel. That passed a death trap at night. Straight drop to the river. No good reason to be out here. "Stay put," Detective Miller barked. "Backup's minutes away." But Marcus's gut screamed, "Whatever's in that bag, George doesn't want it found." He grabbed his flashlight and moved. The showdown. "Reverend George!" Marcus yelled as he hit the lower platform. The old man whirled, headlamp blinding. "You? Following me?" "You flew out of town like hell was chasing you," Marcus lied, edging closer. "What's in the bag?" "Cemetery dirt, right?" George's silence was heavier than the bag in his hand. Then, sirens. The Reverend's face twisted. "You called the cops?" The bag thudded to the ground. Inside, not dirt, books. Marcus's stomach dropped. His father's missing journals. "You stole these," Marcus snarled. "And those dog remains at the grave? That was him, wasn't it? You were going to toss my father into the river." The fall lights flashed above. "Police! Freeze!" George's eyes darted. Then he lunged for the cliff's edge. Marcus grabbed air as the Reverend vaulted the railing, until two cops snagged his arms mid-fall. "Not today," an officer grunted, hauling him back. "Judgment comes in court first." Aftermath, Detective Miller marched over, scowling but relieved. "I said stay in the car." Marcus exhaled, shaking. "Had to know." "Now we do," she said, eyeing the evidence. "Station, now." As cops cuffed George, Marcus stared at the river below. Final answers. Drama, crime, Mystery. XT. Eagle Point Lookout. Day Marcus stares at the cliff's edge, gut churning. If he hadn't been here, his father's ashes would be gone forever. He takes a shaky breath. Marcus, quietly. One favor, call the hospital. Tell the nurse I'll be late. I promised the boy I'd bring communion. Detective Miller nods. Detective Miller. We'll handle it. As they climb back to the cars, Marcus glances back, so close to losing the truth about his father's death. Int. Police station. Later, Reverend George is booked. Pastor Harold sits in cuffs, face like stone. Marcus follows Miller into a bright conference room. On the table, a rotted diary, pages black with mold, a sermon notebook, brittle but intact, a shovel, and worst of all, bone fragments in an evidence bag. Detective Miller, gentle. We think it's him. DNA will confirm. Marcus swallows hard. Marcus. What now? Miller walks him through the statement. The forensics tech lifts a crumbling page from the diary. Miraculously, some words survive. Tech, reading. Missing funds, over $10,000. Harold and George lied. They must be held accountable. A beat, Miller exhales. Detective Miller, they buried the books after the body. Otherwise, we'd have nothing. The sermon notebook shows Elijah's last messages. Confront evil with love, but confront it. Interrogation room, mirror through the glass. Reverend George sobs into his hands. COPOS. He cracked. Says they killed your father because he found out they were stealing. And hesitates, because he was black. Marcus closes his eyes. 25 years of silence, shattered. A secret buried for 25 years. Marcus sank into the chair as the officer spoke. George confessed everything, the detective said. Your father gave them a choice. Admit their sins in front of the church or face exposure. They refused. That night in 1977, they attacked him in the basement, strangled him. Then they wrapped his body in a church robe and buried him, but not in a normal grave. Marcus clenched his fists. They hid him under an old pet's grave, right in the church cemetery. No marker, no trace. Then they took his Bible, his robe, and other evidence, stuffed them in an old Adidas bag, and paid someone to bury it deep in the woods under a tree stump. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Why did no one question this? Detective Miller sighed. They had power, they lied, and the town let it go. But now, after 25 years, the truth is out. They'll go to prison, the detective said, and your father will finally get the burial he deserves. Marcus looked down at his father's sermon notes, words about truth, love, and standing against evil. Even in his last moments, his father had fought for what was right. A boy, a hospital, and a miracle. Later, Marcus walked into Robbie's hospital room. The boy's aunt and uncle stared at him. Freeman? The uncle asked. Like the pastor who vanished? Marcus nodded. My father. Robbie sat up, eyes wide. Where were you? I waited. Marcus smiled. Helping the police. Turns out, we both found miracles today. He pulled out the communion set. The aunt frowned. But you're not a pastor. Marcus held her gaze. Number, just a man who believes God was watching all along. The aunt's face softened. She nodded. With gentle hands, Marcus opened the communion set and arranged the bread and juice on the tray table over Robbie's bed. He spoke the sacred words, the same ones his father had said 1,000 times. He broke the bread, passed it to Robbie, his guardians, and took a piece himself. Then he poured the juice, handing each of them a small cup. As they shared communion in that quiet hospital room, Marcus felt something change inside him. A heavy darkness, 25 years of it, began to lift. When they finished, Robbie looked up at him. Will I see you again? Yeah, Marcus said. Maybe soon. If you and your family ever want to visit Mount Olive Baptist Church, I think they'll need help in the days ahead. Robbie smiled and hugged him. When I grow up, he whispered, I want to be kind, like you. Later, walking out of the hospital, Marcus did something he hadn't done in 25 years. He prayed, a real prayer, Thank you. And for the first time, he admitted he'd been wrong to blame God. He thought about the day, how a sick boy in a graveyard had led him back to church, how a forgotten notebook gave him a reason to return, how every small step had brought him closer to the truth about his father. God had used Robbie without him even knowing, and because Marcus chose to help, even while hurting, God had shown him the way. Decades of lies and evil had tried to bury the truth, but in the end, good won. The God his father served had never abandoned him. Under a sky full of stars, Marcus drove home, already making plans. Once the investigation ended, he'd give his father the burial he deserved. He'd reach out to Mount Olive's congregation, people who'd never known what really happened to their pastor. And maybe, he'd find his way back to faith. Not in spite of his father's tragedy, but because of the courage his father showed in his last days. As he parked in his driveway, Marcus looked up and whispered, "Thank you for never letting go of me, even when I let go of you." After 25 years of rage and doubt, Marcus Freeman finally had peace. His father was gone, but the truth was free. Justice was coming, and against all odds, his faith was alive again.